Giants have emerged from their strongholds to threaten civilization as never before. Hill giants are stealing all the grain and livestock they can, while stone giants have been scouring settlements that have been around forever. Fire giants are press ganging the small folk into the desert, while frost giant longships have been seen pillaging along the Sword Coast. Even the elusive cloud giants have been witnessed, their wondrous cities appearing above Waterdeep and Baldur's Gate. Where is the storm giant King Hecaton, who is tasked with keeping order amongst the giants? That's the elevator pitch to Storm King's Thunder, and this is a review of my module. Before we go into the breakdown of the module, I just want to mention that from here on out, there will be spoilers in this review, so just be wary of that. Okay, so Storm King's Thunder itself is split into 12 chapters. The first chapter is an introductory adventure and takes place in Nightstone. Some people feel that this isn't a great adventure, however I feel for first time Dungeons & Dragons players it can work quite well. The second chapter gives the players a choice of which city they want to go to, from Triboar, Goldenfields or Bryn Shander. I'd recommend going to Bryn Shander as it is a really expansive city and a cool, no pun intended, place to go for your players. And the players will actually experience a giant attack, whichever choice they choose. The third chapter is the most decisive chapter in the entire of this module, and the one that can make and break this campaign for people. And that's because the third chapter is wide open. It pretty much turns the adventure into a sandbox. I'll go into hints and things and how you can kind of improve this chapter as we kind of go throughout this review. The fourth chapter is where the players can really narrow their focus in how the direction of this adventure is going to go. And that's because the 5th through to 9th chapter is actually a choice, as each chapter represents a giant stronghold, and the players can choose where to go, with the idea at the end of that chapter, get an item known as the Conch that will take them to the Maelstrom and then take them into the 10th chapter. As the 10th chapter takes place in the Storm Giant stronghold, Storm Giants being the top of all giant race, the kind of hierarchy, that's the top. This 10th chapter is where a lot of things start to click for the players and the story tries to fall into place, and it's quite a good chapter. The 11th chapter is where the players can go and rescue King Hecaton, and then the final chapter, chapter 12, is the final confrontation against Imrith, the wicked and wise blue dragon. Okay, some pros and cons with Storm King's Thunder then. Some pros. The adventure itself is extremely varied in that players can expect to encounter many different aspects of the game of Dungeons & Dragons, from cities and political intrigue to thematic dungeons and climactic battles against dragons, and includes open ocean naval combat, just to name a few experiences that the players will get out of this module. And this ties in nicely with my second positive with Storm King's Thunder, in that because it is varied, it offers a lot of tools to a dungeon master. When talking about Chapter 3 and how expansive it is, I would view it more as a well of knowledge and a tool that dungeon masters can use even outside of Storm King's Thunder in your own Sword Coast adventures, as many areas of this part of Faerun are explained and summarised well in this chapter. And a third positive with this adventure is it gives the players a lot of choice and thus empowers their agency. From Chapter 2, the players are offered many side quests that then lead into Chapter 3. Also, players can choose which giant stronghold they'll go to, and then they can plan their attack against the final boss dragon, Imrith, that wraps up the story. However, there are some cons to this adventure. For a first-time dungeon master, it can quickly escape the grasp of the DM if not carefully planned. Players can spend a lot of time not pursuing the storyline and also find themselves visiting many different locations quite rapidly, requiring a dungeon master who is quick on their feet. The storyline itself isn't clear until the latter half of the adventure, and consequently it may prove difficult to get the players invested in the adventure itself. And finally, the structure of the module locks content away from the players, such as choosing a giant stronghold won't have the players experiencing the other strongholds on offer, which can add replayability to the dungeon master, but for when the adventure is heavily soaked in encountering giants, locking some of that away can detract from the game. This section of the review details the story my players made out of this adventure and can hopefully give you some suggestions or ideas you could put into your version with your players. What you'll find is that I really lent into the sandbox nature and ended up tying the kidnapping of King Hecton with Cyric the Mad God and Cyric's plans to wipe hierarchy. The main reason I did this is that I felt the reasons why the giant ordering was broken was lacking, and I wanted to make a more impactful cause for why the players would care. After rescuing the villagers from the caves at Nightstone and encountering the Zentarum faction, they headed towards Waterdeep, not before being picked up by the cloud giant Zephyros. This forgetful giant was fun to roleplay and ended up delivering the players to Brynshanda instead. After saving the city against frost giants, they met a friendly frost giant named Harshnag. Harshnag suggests the adventurers visit the Temple of Annam in the Spine of the World to learn what was happening with the recent giant attacks. Though the problem is, Harshnag had gambled away the key to the temple, and the players could find that key in Yatar. After encountering fire giants on their way to Yatar, they arrived in this juxtaposed pirate and noble town to then end up capsizing the gambling ship. And after picking up the key, they unfortunately lost a party member and then had a quick skirmish with a stone giant and headed with Harshnag and Zephyros back up to the Annam Temple. After learning they needed to require a conch to get to the Maelstrom, the location of the storm giants, they had an encounter with Clouth, the ancient red dragon, and ended up witnessing the escape of the trickster god Cyric in Neverwinter. Loving the town of Yatar, the players went back to obtain a ship, and then they set sail to reach Svalbard on the Sword Coast, Svalbard being the location of the conch and the frost giant stronghold. After an explosive encounter with the frost giants and white dragons in Svalbard, they headed back inland to Candlekeep, where they again fought Cyric. Deciding to go back to Annam and empower the conch, they then visited the Maelstrom and free King Hecton and had the final confrontation with Imrith, the villain of the Storm King's Thunder module. Now the Storm King's module ended there, however the players knew they wanted to defeat Cyric, and so they headed into the Shadow Plane to collect 3 items to defeat the god, with the conclusion of their adventure unfolding in a dramatic fight with Cyric and his illusions in the city of Neverwinter. Often I'd ask my players for feedback on finishing the 2-year campaign that we had with this module, and their thoughts were loving the quest structure and how the sandboxy nature allowed them to do almost anything they wanted as players, and sometimes when they recalled their favourite moments, more often than not, it was actually moments outside of the Storm King's module itself. And I think this actually lends credence to the module and how it can be a fantastic springboard and a tool for Dungeon Masters to use in their game. I'd like to share with you some tips I would suggest for this module and also the resources that I used. Tip number 1, have a player or players take the giant language. This gives more freedom when interacting with the giants. Tip number 2, run the supporting but not official Storm King's Thunder side quest, the Kraken's Gamble. If you ask my players for a highlight in their game, they'd mention Yatar and the chaos they made on the gambling ship, the Grand Dame. As I mentioned in my chapter review, the story really clicks into place in around chapter 10, and this chapter a clue is given to the players in the shape of a golden goose coin. The coin points to kidnap King Hecton, and without the players ever encountering the coin before, this moment in chapter 10 can fall flat. However, the Kraken's Gamble creates a reason before chapter 10 to discover these coins, and it is a really fun little side quest with pirates, nobles and gambling dens, and watching the players' minds click in chapter 10 when they see this coin again is a really rewarding for a DM. Tip number 3. Chapter 4 gives the players a choice in which giant stronghold they'd like to adventure to next. If the players haven't encountered many different types of giants, they won't really have an informed choice of who or where they'd want to go to. And so, I would strongly recommend showcasing in some way each giant type before that choice is made, in an encounter or two before they get to chapter 4. This gives the player agency, but also leading up to the choice, the players have a good taste of the module and the different giant races. Tip number 5. Ask the players for feedback from time to time, maybe after a large encounter, or after a city, or even if you have a sense there's a shift in the game, mainly because this allows you as a Dungeon Master to flavour the game to the party's likes and quickly resolve dislikes, allowing for a more fun game. Tip number 6, and the final tip, is a big one, and this one revolves around chapter 3 and how I ran the sandbox nature of the module. A sandbox isn't fun if there aren't areas planned. The great thing about being a Dungeon Master is how malleable you can make things. I recommend planning ahead 2 or 3 things that your players can do. Chapter 3 gives you a ton of resources to support this. However, I wouldn't plan so far ahead that the party won't even encounter that material until way down the adventure. Instead, plan around what's happening in the moment with your adventuring players. Then finally, when wanting to put the players back on track, as a dungeon master, you drop in the major threads of Storm King's Thunder module in a side quest that they're pursuing. But please plan something small. You don't want players to lose steam or interest. Linked below in this video are all the resources I used when running Storm King's Thunder, from the heavily advertised Kraken's Gamble side quest, the lore written up on Imrith, and the evil dragon in this adventure. The Reddit page I used to gather maps for my games, and finally some more supporting material for Chapter 3 that you can flavour your adventure as your party explore the Sword Coast. In conclusion, there is a little bias in this review, as this was my very first module I ran as a dungeon master, and thus I have a lot to owe this adventure in making me grow and improve my skills as a dungeon master. With the tip on receiving feedback from your players from time to time, and to plan a few steps ahead of the players, you can form this module into something really strong and fun for your players. If focusing solely on the module and wrapping up Chapter 3 quite quickly, this module takes around 40 sessions to complete, and an average play time of about 120 to 150 hours, in my estimate. You can make this adventure as long and as short as you'd like, and again, if you gauge your players, you can see what they like and what they don't like, and you can make this a really rewarding and fun module for you and your players at the game table. If you like this review, please drop a thumbs up and leave a comment. If you've run this module yourself, I'd be interested to see what your thoughts are compared to mine. If you're a player and you've run this, I'd be interested to think what you liked about it and some of the highlights that you had in this module. They're always fun to read. And finally, please consider subscribing to this channel, as I plan to make more videos akin to this and more fun Dungeons & Dragons content is coming. Thank you very much for watching.